Wow, what a week of college football. It was an incredible week 6. It's always the weeks that we don't think that there's a lot going on. Every single thing seems to go crazy. Week 6 is the chaos week, and I think we just saw that. Abe, unbelievable day of football. Unbelievable day of football.
Yeah, it was great. The games that were big that we wanted to deliver did, all the way from noon again until the later stages. But then there's always those couple down the radar games that just pop up and somehow find a way to your screen, right? Like you don't plan on watching them, but at some point other games turn into blowouts. They slide in, and they delivered as well, even through, for those of you who made it up, all the way to the very end. Just an outstanding day from start to finish, and a day that did shape what's going to turn into a crazy chase for playoff position. It certainly did shape that a little bit, as we'll get to throughout this podcast.
Yeah, it was just a crazy week of college football. We had players throwing other players into punts. We had massive upsets. People get eliminated from the college football playoff competition. We have some other ones who I think we're still going to be seeing stick around, and some who've reinserted themselves after dominant weeks. But I do want to start, Abe, if you will, with probably the team that I was most impressed with, the Georgia Bulldogs. They were unbelievable in this game. They dominated Kentucky. They held them to 55 yards rushing. And on the offensive side of the football, Carson Beck sets a career-high passing, 389 yards, 4 touchdowns. We talked about how this could have looked like a new team moving into week 6. I mean, we hadn't seen them look like Georgia yet. They were rated like Georgia because we'd seen them win the last 2 national championships. But I think after Saturday, we finally have seen them be that dominant team that we expected to see all season.
Yeah, it's like John McClane in Die Hard. Welcome to the party, pal. I mean, that's what this was. It was an absolute coming out party on a number of fronts. Obviously, for Carson Beck to now back up the fourth quarter performance that he had on the road at Auburn and the performance there with this. But this is what we've been waiting for. I mean, how many weeks were we going to say this is the week Georgia's going to wake up? They finally woke up. They're up 21-0, 4 minutes into the second quarter. They take away any semblance of what Kentucky wants to do, which is run the ball. Great to see them stop the run, because that was a question coming into this game. Every facet. Now, I don't care that Kentucky eventually got to double digits. Every facet, this was an outstanding performance from the Georgia Bulldogs. And look, they had lost 20 first-place votes the previous week in a pedestrian victory on the road, albeit against Auburn. They got 15 of those back, and rightfully so. They have restamped themselves. This is the team that looks like they can win a third straight national championship. We'd seen it in spurts. We had not seen it for a complete game. Now we have. And the question going forward is this the Georgia team we see week in and week out? Did they discover something going on the road and now hosting Kentucky? Still to be determined, but it was nice to see this Georgia team do what they did. And I was thinking before the podcast, was this the most impressive victory any team has put together this season? You're welcoming in a top 25 team. The game is over midway through the second quarter. With the exception of maybe what Oregon did to Colorado, and I know how we feel about Colorado, but at the time they were ranked. But with the exception of that, you're talking about 2 ranked teams and the dismantling. It really might be the most complete, impressive performance of any team this season. And I know later on I'll talk about how impressed I've been with Michigan game in, game out every single year. But Georgia on Saturday night, I think, put together the single best performance of the season.
I'm not going to go that far necessarily, but I think that this is something that Georgia fans were really looking forward to seeing. This is the Kentucky team that their style of play really falls into the hands of Georgia. And when we discussed that, Brennan Adams was
if they were going to stop the run, it did. And
yes.
they found some trouble doing that. We talked about what Auburn did, but man, I don't have the stats in front of me. It was like 50-something yards as a team or whatever
55.
It was. Yeah, I mean, that's outstanding for a team you knew you wanted to run heavy. To limit them to that's a job well done from that defense.
Yeah, and this was a game that when we discussed it on Saturday on College Football Game Time on 92.9 The Game, this was a game that we expected Devin Leary was going to have to win because when you have a running back and a running back focused rushing attack, which of course this is one of those types of teams, you need a little bit of superior play from the quarterback position, especially if you're facing a Georgia team, which, prides itself on stopping the run, especially when that comes from the running back, and it wasn't exactly like that Auburn attack where you can sprinkle in some quarterback carries and some diversions that way. Devin Leary proved that he's just not capable of doing that. And he looked pretty out of his depth in this football game. I was very unimpressed with him for the most part. He did finish with the 2 touchdowns, but I think by the time he scores, this game was pretty well out of reach. It was pretty obvious by the second quarter that this is just not going to be one of those games that Kentucky was going to have a chance in. They got beat up and down the field. They got beat in the trenches. And this was just the exact kind of game that if you're a Georgia fan that you've been praying that you'd see. Brock Bowers continued his campaign as the best college football player in the country, regardless of position. I mean, he's just an incredible focal point for this offense. And it doesn't matter really what the other team wants to do. They're not really going to be able to stop Brock Bowers. And he showed that on Saturday with this win. And I think with this win also, I know we're going to talk about another SEC team that looked very impressive on Saturday, but I think Georgia's taken their place at the front of the SEC as the top dog in the conference, no pun intended, but they're the best team in the SEC right now. They're likely the best chance that they have at a college football playoff spot. But after last week, they're certainly not the only one. And I think that we're going to get into that discussion here in just a little bit. But I do want to move on. I want to move to the Red River Shootout because the Oklahoma Sooners were I think they were one of the most impressive performances of the day. Oklahoma had a lot of doubters. They had a lot of doubters. Me. Dylan Gabriel, I said he was going to have to be Superman. He was Superman. 285 yards passing, 113 yards rushing. He had the touchdown. I mean, he drove his team 75 yards in a minute and 2 seconds to win that football game. It was unbelievable. And on the other hand, Quinn Ewers doesn't really seem to realize that he's playing very important football games. And sometimes when he's playing Alabama, he plays out of his mind good. And he looked great again this year against Bama. He looked great against them last year. But then I thought we had turned this page because I thought he proved something to me and to the rest of the country when they played Kansas that, he's going to continue being Quinn Ewers. And that was one of his biggest problems last year is that sometimes he would just turn it off and he wouldn't look very good. And he turned it off on Saturday. He had 2 interceptions in the first 6 plays of the game. Like, you can't start a football game off like that, especially a heated rivalry like the Red River Shootout. And, of course, they lose this game. Not all is lost for them. They're still going to have an opportunity at a Big 12 title game. They control their destiny for the most part. But it's likely that they're destined for a rematch against this Oklahoma team who I did not give full respect to. And now credit to them because now we have to respect them.
Well, look, we came into this game asking, and I think it was a fair question to ask, is Texas the best team in the country? And I think based on what they had done leading up to this game, it was a realistic opinion to hold. And for Oklahoma to come in, and I mentioned it on the show on Saturday morning, Oklahoma's a team that forces turnovers. They lead the nation in interceptions. They added, you mentioned the 2 interceptions. I think probably more damaging for Quinn Ewers was actually the fumble that he had on third down. And so, look, I don't want to say Texas was unprepared as a unit, as a team, but I think there are aspects of what Oklahoma did that Texas was not ready for. And one of those is along the defensive line. And I know Jonathan Brooks got it cooking in the second half, and he topped 130 yards. But those were tough yards, and some of them not as impactful as you would like to have seen. Texas had a rough go on offense. Quinn Ewers was sacked 5 times. We talked about the three turnovers, the 2 interceptions early on, and the fumble in the second half. If you take those away, it's actually a pretty good day. He's over 300 yards. He only had a couple incompletions. But at the end of the day, that's not enough to get it done.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it a little bit. This was an Oklahoma team that against Cincinnati struggled a little bit in the red zone, but they moved the ball. They had a lot of big chunk plays. I think we did see a little bit of that as well. And again, this is not your daddy's Oklahoma. They play a little bit of defense, and Texas up front was just not prepared. I think they knew going into that game against Alabama, it'd be about the big boys. I don't think they expected that. I don't think they were ready mentally for for Oklahoma to be as good up the middle as they were. And they were. And it made a big difference. We saw Sark. He had to get creative with play calling. He had to take chances he probably didn't think he'd be taking in this game. And look, a lot of them worked out early on. Obviously the fake punt and some trick plays here and there, but in the end, you get down to the red zone, you have an unlucky interception, and you come away with no points. So this was a game through and through where Oklahoma, who was kind of in that fringe, there's a lot of these fringe teams, right? And we'll talk about them throughout. Yeah, they're undefeated, but are they really in the championship discussion, right?
Yeah.
Like the North Carolinas, some of the teams out west, USC, I think is in that discussion right now. Oklahoma was in that group, and they have now flipped. They are in a different group of discussion, and this was a big-time win for them. I was surprised as you were. I thought this was a chance for Texas to come out and make that statement.
Yeah.
Tell people, hey, we are the best team in the country and we're coming for the national championship. But that wasn't how this thing played out. And Oklahoma, very, very impressive. And I think you have to now place them into that discussion of they might be headed towards a college football playoff berth.
I think you're right. I mean, this is the team that looked very good. I will say, though, I would be hard-pressed to believe that they could beat Texas again.
Right.
You relied very heavily on turnovers, and I just don't trust turnovers in the grand scheme of things. And look, if I'm Texas, this is a wake-up call that you needed. And it's not every year that the eventual college football champion goes undefeated. It's not something that happens every year. In fact, I'd say most years it doesn't they don't go undefeated. So a lot of teams need this sort of wake-up call throughout the season. And I think that this is exactly what needed to happen for Texas. And I was very surprised in the nature, like you mentioned, they got pushed around in this game. I mean, they allowed 200 yards rushing. Dylan Gabriel was a stud in this game, but he runs for 113 yards. I just don't see that happening in a second game. And I'm not trying to take anything away from what Oklahoma did, because this is a game that should be celebrated. If you're a Sooners fan, this is a great game. This is a huge result for these two teams. And especially coming off of what we saw last year, which Brent Venables got run off the field. Dylan Gabriel didn't play in that game, but they lose 49-0. That's the most points that Texas had scored in this contest, going back 118 years. And it's just an incredible performance from them on Saturday. I was very impressed. The defense got after it. They had 10 tackles for loss. They had 5 sacks of Quinn Ewers. This is a very good Oklahoma team that really just established themselves as contenders in the college football playoff. But I do want to move on to another team that potentially established themselves as a contender in the college football playoff. And that, believe it or not, the Louisville Cardinals. They have Notre Dame come on the road to Louisville, and they look the better team from start to finish for the most part. And they were very impressive. And it was the two guys who I mentioned on College Football Game Time. It's Jawar Jordan and it's Jamari Thrash. And if you don't know who those two players are, do yourself a favor, go check out some of the Louisville highlights from this season. They have been electric. Jawar Jordan goes off for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jamari Thrash has eight receptions and a touchdown in this contest. And he's probably one of the more exciting wide receivers in college football right now. He can take the top off of defense, Tyreek Hill style. And Notre Dame just looked tired in this game. And it's one of the results of difficult scheduling. And I know for years, Notre Dame had received negative commentary on the type of schedule that they played. And that's not the case anymore. This is their 3rd consecutive top 25 ranked opponent. And I think it showed. They had 2 very emotional finishes, one against Ohio State that they lost and one against Duke that they won. Then they have to go on the road for a 2nd consecutive week, and that's not easy. That sort of thing is not easy on a team. And Abe, I think
not to mention, by the way, that they've got USC coming up.
Yeah, and they were in a tough spot, and I think they are going to be hard pressed to not let bad become worse. This is just the wheels are very close to falling off. This snaps a 30-game winning streak in the ACC that dated back to 2017. Just an incredible streak that they had. But that came to an end with this loss and likely any hope of postseason aspirations.
Yeah, very interesting game, this one. And I think a lot of people were familiar with Jamari Thrash, probably not as many as familiar with Jordan. And that was an outstanding showing. And really, I thought Louisville needed that sort of performance from him. I don't think you wanted to put too much on the shoulders of Jack Plummer. We've seen him have some good games, but we've also seen him have some bad games. And this was a game that, again, maybe this week is about physicality, right? We talked about Georgia out physically in Kentucky and being able to stop the run. We talked about Oklahoma maybe surprising Texas a little bit. I was surprised Notre Dame. Again, I thought they'd be better a week ago in the trenches against Duke. They didn't really show up there. And they really didn't get the job done here. And Louisville took full advantage. Louisville felt like kind of some of those Purdue teams of the past couple of years with the Rondale Moores, and that's not to, but it felt like they needed big plays, weird plays to sometimes get on the scoreboard. That wasn't the case. And now they got big plays, but it wasn't just some sort of freak tipped ball nonsense that goes, the distance against Ohio State. This was big boy football for Louisville that we really hadn't seen from them in quite a while. And this is a big win for Coach Brom. It's a big win for the program. And look, their schedule is manageable. I know it sounds weird. The ACC's all sorts of mucked up with who plays who. There's potential, and I'm not predicting this, Garrett, but there's potential of 3 teams being undefeated in the ACC all the way through the conference title game. Louisville, of course, being one of them, because the schedule, they just aren't playing each other.
Yeah.
And this was a big step for Louisville. And I was really surprised. I really was surprised, and it was a complete effort. And when they got control, this was what the most impressive thing was for me. Once they got control of this game, there was no letting Notre Dame back into it. It felt like there was no chance for Notre Dame to climb back into it. They seized control of this game, and they kept a tight grip on it throughout the majority of the second half. Very impressive performance. I think they found their recipe for success in terms of what you're asking your quarterback to do, what you're asking some of the other members of your offense to do. Louisville, I mean, they are jumping into the rankings, and look, they're still in that group of other teams that are undefeated, that are in this weird little tier. We probably don't believe that they can make the playoffs, but they are. The zero's still next to that loss column. So very impressed by what they were able to do. Excited to see what they do moving forward. Now they've got some eyes on them. They're no longer underdogs. Now they've got a little bit of pressure, and they're going to have to approach the games a little bit different. Some teams thrive under that. Some teams collapse under that. Looking forward to seeing what the Cardinals do moving forward.
Yeah, they have their first top 10 wins in back-to-back seasons, I think in school history, in consecutive seasons, and both come at the hands of Sam Hartman. Last year it was Wake Forest. This year it's Sam Hartman at Notre Dame, and he throws multiple interceptions in this game. He just looks kind of hapless out there, and he just sort of got pushed around a bit. But you talked about that schedule, and I do want to talk about that real quick, because next week they go on the road to Pitt. That's a very winnable football game.
But I mean, don't forget they were not good on the road against NC State. They squeaked out a 13-10 win. That's their only road game this season. So I know you say it's not a great game. I know the spread opened at almost 10. But I'm going to have, again, it's a different sort of pressure. They did not look good on the road the first time. I'm going to have an extra eye on this. Normally, this might be a game where I wouldn't really keep too much focus on. I'm going to be paying attention. They need to show up in that game.
Yep. And so they go on the road to Pittsburgh. Then they have Duke coming to town, number 7.
You assume Riley Leonard's back or not back?
That's my biggest thing, is that's the thing. You've got to watch. All of a sudden, Duke could be having 2 college game days on their hands if those are 2 teams that are, if they just maintain where they are. But right, the status of Riley Leonard, the quarterback for the Duke Blue Devils, of course, is going to be looming large in that one. But then they have Virginia Tech at home, and they have Virginia at home. Those are 2 wins. And then you have a road contest against Miami, which you never know what's going to happen in that game. It's a wounded animal in Miami, like we're going to discuss here in just a little bit. Then you have Kentucky. So it's not the craziest of schedules. I think their 3 ranked opponents are all 3 winnable football games. And I think that they could be a team. I don't necessarily see them as a college football playoff contender, but they are a team that could contend for an ACC title. One team that I do see as a college football playoff contender are the Alabama Crimson Tide. And I remember saying on this very podcast that I said, if you're going to dance on the grave of the Alabama Crimson Tide, make sure you dance lightly, because they will jump up and bite you given their first opportunity. And they did that to Jimbo Fisher and the Texas A&M Aggies. They get the win on the road at Texas A&M 26-20. And Abe Gordon, Alabama's back. Jalen Milroe, I know you had massive question marks about the quarterback. And I know that I picked against them in this game. I flip-flopped at the last second like I did on a few games. But Jalen Milroe throws for 321 yards. Completes almost more impressively, 73% of his passes. He has 3 touchdowns in this game. And ironically, the thing that I expected them to be able to do in this game was run the football. They didn't do that. They had negative 13 yards rushing in the first half. And then they finished this game with 23. That's the 3rd lowest of the Nick Saban era at Alabama. And I'm very impressed with what I saw from Alabama. And I think that they have thrust themselves squarely into the middle of the college football playoff conversation.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, assuming they make their way through the SEC West, they're still going to have to beat Georgia to get in there. A loss to Georgia in the SEC title game would remove them from that consideration.
Sure.
You know what's become very interesting about Jalen Milroe is, because I have not changed my feelings on him, but they have figured out what they want to do with him. And if you watch that game, he is so boomer bust because he still cannot make a throw under 10 yards. He overthrew multiple guys who are wide open on checkdowns. It's ugly, but they're just running guys down the field and they are letting them chuck it up there. And that's how you end up with Jermaine Burton with 197 yards and 2 touchdowns. And it was big play or no play. And if that's what they have to do on offense, that's what they're going to do. And like you said, don't count out Nick Saban. He has figured out what works for their guy. As limited as he is, he throws a great deep ball. He uses his legs. Now, they didn't use his legs too much. They were relying on his arm, and that's fine. They got the job done. They took advantage of A&M, who was a little weak on the back end, pretty good up front, as you mentioned, in regards to stopping the run. But I don't know how far you can take that style of quarterback. It's going to be really interesting. You know, Georgia's strength, I think we could all argue, at least to this point in the season, has been on defense, their secondary. And for you're now asking, and now I know we're fast forwarding a bunch of weeks here, but theoretically you're asking Jalen Milroe to just beat Georgia with deep balls when that's probably the thing they defend the best. And so it's very interesting that is what they've settled on, as this is what our quarterback has. Here are his limitations. Let's take advantage of what he does well. And it's pretty much just go down the field, let me hawk it out there and see what happens. And in this instance, it was a clear advantage for Jermaine Burton. There's no doubt about that. He was absolutely outstanding. There were a couple of deep balls that he nearly came down with that didn't get tacked on to the completion percentage of the yardage or the touchdowns, but they were giving him 50-50 balls all day long, and more than not, he was coming down with it. So very interesting to see that's what their offense has become. But on the other side of the ball, we talked about Max Johnson had come into this Texas A&M team and kind of re-energized the team offensively. We saw a little bit of it on Saturday afternoon, but not nearly enough. I mean, he did throw a touchdown, but he also threw an interception. The run game never got going for him either, which certainly hurt. And there just wasn't enough. The crowd did their best to try and keep them in it, but it just wasn't there. This is a very good win for Alabama to go on the road, knowing limitations that you have on your offense, finding a way to work within those limitations to maximize your output. They did that, and the 26-20, obviously A&M scored late. The game was probably a little bit wider of a gap than that. So very impressive win by Alabama. And you're right. They are back in that discussion. If they're able to run the table, if they're able to knock out Georgia in the SEC championship game, a one-loss Alabama with that one loss being what it was, would most likely be in the college football playoffs.
I would go a step further. If they finish this season and win the SEC title game with one loss, they're debatably the second overall seed.
They're
debatably the number 2 team in the country. But
yeah, but or debatably they'd be out. I mean, there's still a hypothetical of teams being undefeated. I mean,
we'll see.
You got Big Ten, you got
Oklahoma. Long way to go.
You got
it's a long way to go.
Well, yeah, I don't think they would be the number 2 seed if there's multiple undefeateds. That's all.
Maybe, maybe not. But I will say though about the schedule specifically. So now that you finish up this game against Texas A&M, who I would say is very well deserving of a top 25 ranking. It was almost curious that they didn't have one compared to their other Baton Rouge partners in the SEC West. But now you have your biggest contests pretty much exclusively at home. You've got Arkansas coming to town next week. You've got Tennessee, number 19 team in the country, coming to Tuscaloosa. Then you follow that up with a bye week and then LSU coming to town. Then you go on the road to Kentucky. And that's the biggest thing. And then what do you do at Jordan-Hare Stadium? Which I'm very interested to see what they do against this Auburn defense. I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself, but Abe, is this a team that you see going undefeated the rest of the way? I see some pretty massive stumbling blocks depending on what Tennessee and LSU can do.
They're out of their schedule: Arkansas, Tennessee, LSU, Kentucky, and Auburn. If you could only take one of those teams that you think would beat Alabama, and I'm going to pull my hand to the screen because I'm holding up a signal. Who do you think that is?
Of these teams?
Yeah.
I'm going to say LSU probably.
Okay. I mean, I had a T for Tennessee.
I don't think Tennessee
the
on the
Tennessee
road
game's interesting. I want to get a better look at them and what they're doing, but they feel like a team, offense, defense. Maybe they can compete. The LSU thing is just so problematic because of their defense. I can't get behind them beating pretty much anyone. Like we're just being, dude, it's so bad. I thought they would step up and ball up a little bit this week. I know they escaped with defensive touchdown, but we're not gonna. But yeah, I do think it's a relatively manageable schedule, and I do not see them stumbling, at least to the point of the SEC championship game. I agree with you. I think they get there 11-1, and everything is right in front of them. Everything will be on the table, assuming it is Georgia and undefeated Georgia. Everything will be on the table, and the winner is going to the college football playoffs. That is what I see in the future for Alabama. Now, again, there are limitations. Don't let it twist you. I think there are severe limitations on this offense. I think they can be limited by the correct defensive approach. It'll be interesting to see how teams adjust. I didn't think this would be, while I knew this was the strength and weakness of what they could do, I was shocked to see Saban be like, just throw it deep and see what happens. That's how we're going to run our offense. It's like me and Madden pretty much, except it worked out quite well. They got Jermaine Burton. They're running a pass interference offense. That's what I called it.
Basically.
But it'll be interesting to see how teams adjust, because I was still disgusted by the fact that Jalen Milroe's just overthrowing intermediate routes. And like very badly overthrowing them. He's got to hit those. He's got to hit those.
Something. But this is why I said LSU. Tennessee's a team that wants to run the ball. If you're a team that wants to establish your identity as running the football, you're likely not going to have a ton
You're going
of
shootout.
success.
You're going shootout. They're just not ready
I'm
to
going
play.
to say that
that's fair.
But yeah, it's the thing. Like, Tennessee wants to run the football. I know they talk about Joe Milton and Hendon Hooker last year, but this is a team that wants to run the ball. You're in a road contest against Alabama. You're going to need a little bit more to actually get points on the board, and you need to take that defense or that crowd out of it. You need to establish yourself. And I'm not 100% convinced that Tennessee is going to be able to do that in a road game. We've seen what they've looked like in a game against Florida, where the running game gets kind of taken away. They don't look very good. I don't see Alabama necessarily being able to slow down LSU, and I don't know if they're going to be able to keep up if they can't slow them down at least a little bit. And that's why I'm going to say LSU just specifically, because I'm looking at the Texas A&M receivers right here. They finished the day with 239 yards passing in total, but I'm looking specifically at the longs. So Anais Smith, long of 37. Moose Muhammad III, 31 yards. Evan Stewart, 32 yards. Jake Johnson, 22 yards. Le'Veon Moss, 11 yards. All 5 people who caught a pass went double digits on their long. You have a team like LSU who's going to be coming into Tuscaloosa. They like to throw the ball around the field, and I guarantee you Jaden Daniels is a massive, massive step up from whatever Max Johnson is. I mean, we saw last year, he took the starting job away from him at LSU. And look, Texas A&M gave all that they could in this game. I thought that they looked altogether pretty good. They had some there were some questionable things from Jimbo Fisher in particular in this game that, look, I don't think the dude's destined to be a successful head coach anymore. I just don't think he's got that set up in front of him anymore. That's just the nature of the game. I think the game has passed him by, and it's a difficult time to be a Texas A&M Aggie just in general because you got a big old contract that you have. And I think the next question is now becoming, how much of that are you willing to stomach and pay off? But I do want to move on a little bit here. I'm going to go out west and talk about what UCLA was able to do on Saturday over Washington State. Washington State comes into this football game. Cam Ward was 3rd in FBS in passing. This is one of the best offenses in all of college football, and all they did was hold them to 17 points. They made Cameron Ward look relatively pedestrian, and they forced 4 turnovers that they turned into 16 points. The offense itself wasn't super great for UCLA. Carson Steele was very effective on the ground. You could tell exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to run the football because they don't necessarily trust the freshman quarterback to win the games with his arms. But look, he did just enough. He managed the football game effectively enough. And then the Bruins defense, man, I think they're going to be a problem for one of these teams, one of these top teams out there in the Pac-12 this season. Look, they've already derailed one undefeated team. Maybe they'll be able to do it again later on this season. But hey, credit to UCLA for what they were able to do in this game.
Yeah, this is case in point why I have concerns about anyone out of the Pac-12 getting to the college football playoffs. A team like UCLA, who is essentially not in that discussion because of their loss earlier in the season, has played spoiler. And there's so many teams that can play spoiler in that conference. Their defense is legitimate. Utah, I think, was very lucky to squeak by when they did. And yeah, UCLA would be a real problem if they had a slightly better quarterback. And Dante Moore, nothing wrong with him. Look, he is a freshman and he is going through it. He is figuring it out. He was better this week than he was a week ago. And so, this was a good step up for them offensively, but their defense is a real problem for opposing teams. It's going to be interesting to see how some of the other teams, some of the powerful offenses in that conference handle it. Washington State, as you mentioned, did not handle it very well. And so it's just such a difficult conference. And you kind of had put Oregon State and UCLA over here, Utah, the teams with the one loss. But look, you may not be holding them in consideration for a college football playoff run, but they are, all of those teams, very possible and very likely to play spoiler for the teams you are looking at for a college football playoff run. It's going to be very difficult to get through this year undefeated for anyone in the Pac-12. And UCLA is just, man, when you talk about all of the great offenses and the quarterbacks that are going on in that conference, sometimes I like that old school team who can just get it done on that side of the ball at every level, the front, all the way to the back and through the middle with the linebackers. They have an outstanding defense. They're fun to watch. I know not everyone likes to watch like good defensive teams. I particularly do. I always have. And I really like watching UCLA. They would be real dangerous if they had a little bit more on the offensive side of the ball. We'll see how much Moore can progress as the season goes on. It felt like this was a good step forward for him, even though he did have 2 interceptions. They got a really good win, and look, they're just here to play spoiler. And now, unfortunately, it looks like that's the role Washington State wants to play as well.
Well, here's the other thing that I will say about the Pac-12. I know you're saying that they're. I'm not going to relegate.
One loss could get into the playoffs.
A one loss will get into the playoffs.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that a step further. The Pac-12, we talked to Dan Lanning on Saturday, the head coach of the Oregon Ducks. on paper, they're the best conference in football.
Sure.
They really are. And I think that if they're not, then they're right there at the very top. This season, UCLA is a 4-1 team, or excuse me, I think it's 4-1 or 5-1. But this is a 4-1. So this is a team that I think could still go play in a Rose Bowl. Like this is a good football team. I don't think that they're going to go throughout the rest of the season undefeated necessarily, but this is a group that, they're going to be in every football game they play. And that's the credit of having good defense. I think that the freshman quarterback is going to hold them back, like you mentioned, but they found something in this game. They found a rushing attack that can actually spell their offense, and give them another dimension that they didn't have when they played Utah, which again is another good football team in the Pac-12. And I think that there are 6-7 teams that would potentially be very good teams, no matter what conference they played in. They would be legitimate spoilers in any conference that they played in. And the Pac-12 is continuing to be just the most interesting and fun conference in college football this year. I love what I saw in this game. I love what I saw from UCLA, and I'm exactly like you. I love strong defense. I think good defense makes games more interesting and a lot more fun. Touchdowns are great, and I know that we're going to see that next week in a game that some people might foolishly call an elimination game between Washington and Oregon. That game is going to be a lot of fun. I think that's going to be a little bit on the flip side of whatever this game was. They're going to be having a little bit of high-flying fun offense, and that's going to be our college football game of the week, unless you think otherwise, which I don't think you do.
That's
I
the
think
one, baby. That's
John
the one.
Fricky and everybody else. This is going to be.
Who's Nebraska play? He may have a dissenting opinion, but
we'll see. I don't even know who Nebraska plays off the top
doesn't
of my
matter.
head. Doesn't really matter because
that's the game, baby.
All eyes are going to be on the state of Washington as the Ducks go up there to go play a game in Seattle, and I think that that's going to be a lot of fun. But on the absolute opposite end of the country, we saw something that was pretty incredible. It was a pretty insane moment, and I will admit, I was at an engagement party. And we just finished up at the engagement party, and I was like, all right, I got to go watch the second half of this game because, of course, I covered the Yellow Jackets. I wasn't able to I missed the first half just due to obligations that I had. And I watched the second half in a bar over there in Virginia Highlands. And you know what? I celebrated with everybody else after the craziness that happened on the football field, led, of course, by Mario Cristobal's insane decision, to put it nicely, to not kneel the football. And he's going to get blasted for that all this week, and he deserves to, because they lose this game because of that decision, period. Georgia Tech should never have had an opportunity to win this game. They did. And it was on the 108th anniversary of the 222-0 win over Cumberland, which is still a college football record. They do something, a Miami miracle. They pull it off in honor of that, 1900-something college football team, and they go get a crazy win over a top-rated Miami team who many people expected to be a player in the ACC as they continued on. Now, they're not dead yet. They still control most of their own fate down the stretch. They have a trip to UNC on the line next week, which, again, is going to be another fantastic game to decide who is where on the ACC pecking order, but contenders don't lose games like this, and Miami lost in just excruciating fashion.
Well, it's interesting because separate of how the game finished, this was a disappointing showing for Miami, even if they had held on to win. Look, we were building toward, and look, we've already named Oregon, Washington our college football game of the week, and rightfully so. This could have been a real discussion, though, of UNC and Miami.
Yeah.
Obviously separate of what happened Saturday night. But that was going to be an interesting matchup to one of those teams probably jumping into the top 10. And obviously all for naught at this point. I had actually turned this game off, Garrett, because I see what's going on. I do the math in my head. It's not difficult to comprehend. No timeouts, time on the clock, how long a play clock is, and everything that goes into it. So this game's over. And, I'm laying in bed. I've got the USC game on. I'm scrolling through Twitter and I see a bunch of game's not over yet, blah, blah, blah. Why is this happening? What is this guy doing? And I flip it back on just in time to see the fumble. And I'm not out here. Well, I am out here calling for people's jobs, but I'm not usually out here calling for people's jobs. This is a fireable offense. It can't happen. And it's not the first time for Cristobal that it's happened. It happened to him at his last stop in Oregon. And it's just one of those things where you're like, how do guys get to this point in their career? And I'm not challenging his knowledge of the game or understanding. He's forgotten more than I'll ever know, right? Whatever they say. But this can't happen. It really can't. And I just don't understand sometimes how it ever gets to be that situation. And so, look, I don't know if this ends up costing him his job or not. We'll see where the season goes from here. But now you're faced with this as a terrible loss at home, and to whatever UNC might do to you next week. And by the way, UNC had one of the performances of the weekend. If you didn't pay attention to the 40 burger they put on what was supposed to be a relatively competitive Syracuse team, not in that game. And so we'll see how that plays out for Miami. Maybe they were looking ahead and maybe they'll be more prepared, whatever. But you know what's funny for me? There were 2 fireable offenses in this game, in my opinion, because obviously not taking a knee in victory formation and the fumble and everything that ensued. What are you doing throwing the schoolyard play from the 45? Like, Van Dyke's got an arm to hoss it down there. Like, calling that play as opposed to a Hail Mary, you should be fired for that as well. And by the time you get to the second lateral and you're back behind the original line of scrimmage, you're like, well, I don't think this one's going to work again. Like, it's just so much of a better, not that it's like a great chance that you'll score on a Hail Mary, but that happens way more than 38 laterals and a band on the field. I mean, what are we doing? He needs to be throwing that to the end zone. I don't understand why that wasn't the call. So, you can pinpoint multiple aspects of this. Look, on the field, because Cristobal made his mistakes. On the field, though, Tyler Van Dyke's got to be smarter with the ball. A number of turnovers in the second half let Georgia Tech back into this game, and then obviously the back and forth. A broken play on the backside for Miami. Haynes King does a great job extending. Looks like he's going to scramble instead. Continues horizontally to extend that and gets the guy open. Now, I will say this. The receiver for Georgia Tech, who kind of slid into the end zone,
Christian Leary,
was a little. I would have liked another replay because it looked like I was like, man, what are you doing going down 2? That's not a good look either. But luckily, the touchdown stood.
Yeah.
Great win for Tech. Something they very badly needed coming off of what we saw against Bowling Green. Even if they hadn't won the game, I think they were, unfortunately, we're looking for positives for Brent Key in what could be a toilet bowl of a season. And you're trying to find moral victories. And then this happened, though. And now it becomes not a moral victory, an actual victory. Put the one up in the W column. It was a crazy,
game.
Is this the craziest finish to a game this season? I mean, we've had some good finishes throughout. Obviously, we had some last-second heroics. Obviously, Ohio State, Notre Dame was on the last play of the game.
Yeah.
You had Texas, Oklahoma came down to the final moments of that game. Certainly, we've had some nice backdoor covers on some defensive plays in the final moments of the game. But I almost would have said all of those are more reliable, more predictable percentage-wise. I mean, I know they do that stupid, win percentage score crap that I hate, and it's never accurate because people are idiots and stuff like this happen. It had to be 100%, not even 99.9. It had to be a literal 100% when you've got the ball, second down, no timeouts, and you should be doing what everyone else would have done.
Kneel the ball. Does he learn his lesson? He did this at Oregon too. I don't know.
I think he does learn his lesson, but is it too late? I really. There were questions about him.
It's not too late. It's not too late.
No, it's not. But he's.
But does
now you really got to go on a run this year?
Does he lose the locker room after this?
I think he's lost the boosters, which is more important than the locker room.
We'll see. They have a chance to correct a lot of different things in a road contest up there against North Carolina. But I mean, Haynes King, he channeled his inner Doug Flutie, and they come away with a win. Just an incredible game from them. And what's most impressive to me, though, is the fact that Georgia Tech, and of course, this is the value of the turnover. Georgia Tech won the turnover battle. They dominated Tyler Van Dyke in that specifically. He had the 3 interceptions, and then they also lost that fumble. Miami outgains them in this contest, 454 to 250. They had 23 first downs compared to the Yellow Jackets' 12. You read those stats to me after the game, and you had told me that it was a 3-0 deficit at halftime, I would have thought you were insane. The fact that they would win the game at all is insane. The fact that they were even in this football game is crazy to me. But for whatever reason, I mean, Brent Key talked about this in his post-game press conference. He said effectively that he looked at the stat sheet and he tossed it to the side and he said, not that matters. None of that matters, because what happens is what showed up on the field, and Georgia Tech really didn't. And look, Brent Key is now 5-1 on the road in the ACC against ACC opponents. He's 3-0 against ranked ACC opponents on the road. So if anything, we have an identity with Brent Key and this Georgia Tech football team is that they're going to be a tough out on the road. They just don't never count them out. And I appeared on a bunch of podcasts coming into this game, and a lot of Miami people were very interested in what Georgia Tech could be coming off of a Bowling Green loss. And I said to him, don't sleep on this team. Do not sleep on this team, because this is a bunch that will rally and fight hard. Brent Key has the ability, and he's shown the ability to rally his troops, and he did that again on Saturday, which is, you could say that this is the biggest win of his career as the head coach. I could argue that they've had some wins that are perfectly comparable to it. The win against Pittsburgh, the win against North Carolina last year, and they're going to have to go on the road and do some other big things this year as if they want to reach bowl eligibility. But I think everything for the most part is still in front of Georgia Tech this season. They're now 3-3. They're 2-1 in the ACC, and they control their destiny as far as bowl eligibility. But Abe, I do want to move on to our Week 6 takeaways because I want to lead and say a lot of contenders, a lot of the big-time contenders, they're not dead yet. We talked about Alabama and how they completely control their destiny right now. Texas, too. They completely control their destiny. I think that this was potentially the wake-up call that they needed because, like I said earlier, most college football champions don't go undefeated. Florida won 2 national titles in the late 2000s, and neither of one of those seasons they were undefeated. You look at all the Clemson teams that won national championships, the Alabama teams that won national championships. I think only 2 of those teams were undefeated for Alabama and Nick Saban. Georgia's last year going 15-0 was a bit of an anomaly. I think that it only happened twice, or 3 times, actually. I think it happened 3 times where the college football champion has been undefeated. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this team, I think, needed this wake-up call. They kind of got matched physically by Oklahoma, and the thing that I just didn't expect to happen, at least in the way that it did. But they're not dead yet. And then on top of that, the ACC is not going to be as simple as we thought. It's not just Florida State and whoever else shows up in the ACC title game. No, Miami might have lost, but North Carolina is right there in the thick of things. They had a 40-burger on Saturday night. Drake May throws for 442 yards, and he only just got his best weapon back in Tez Walker. And here comes Louisville. So I think the ACC is going to be very interesting down the stretch. You mentioned it earlier. None of those 3 top teams play each other. So who knows what happens. But the ACC is going to be very fun, very interesting. I know we've talked a lot about the Pac-12, but a lot of college football contenders, they're not dead.
Yeah, I'm kind of going to play this the other way. And while I agree with you that teams like Texas, who has a loss, teams like Alabama, who have a loss, and whoever else you want to add in from the Pac-12 or wherever, while they aren't necessarily dead, we have reached the point of the season where there are elimination games. And Washington, Oregon is one of those next week. And again, I agree with you that the loser of that is not necessarily dead, but from an aspect of you no longer control your own future, and you never know what teams do go undefeated. I agree with you.
In the Pac-12, they still control their future. They still do because there are no divisions. They don't have divisions. But it's not like the SEC.
Again, you no longer, because you've got an SEC team that can go undefeated. You got a Big Ten team that can go undefeated. You got Big 12, ACC could go undefeated. You just don't control your future for the college football playoffs. You're not getting in as a one-loss team if there are 4 conference champions who are undefeated. You're not. Whether it's
that's a
Texas is
long
not
way
jumping
to go before we have
I-
4 undefeateds.
I agree. That's what I'm trying to say. I agree with you. It's unlikely. But in terms of when you look at on the front page of it for where we are now, these are looked at as elimination games. I agree with you on the back end. Teams will get back into it. No doubt about it. Alabama's not dead. Texas is not dead. The loser of Oklahoma, Michigan is not dead. The loser of Penn State, Michigan in a couple weeks. Excuse me, I meant Oregon, Washington is not. I agree with you. They're not dead. But the exciting thing for me is we finally are now at the part of the season, and we had one this past week in Texas, Oklahoma. You've got at least one this coming week with Oregon, Washington, where you're really starting to, again, I know it's not for good, starting to eliminate a couple of these teams that are in the playoff contention. And again, they'll work their way back in. I agree with you, but you're starting to at least get a peck. There's been no pecking order, no semblance of who is the favorite in certain conferences. I think you're at least starting to get to that point. Oklahoma took a big step. Oregon or Washington will take a big step. It'll happen in the Big 12, in the Big 10 in the coming weeks as well. So you're really at the point where some of these games will determine who's going to be in the college football playoffs. That's super exciting for me.
I love that. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Abe, did you have any week 6 takeaways?
Yeah. Still don't know who the Heisman is. And I know I've kind of harped on this a couple of weeks, and I thought maybe Quinn Ewers could take a step. He didn't. Caleb Williams didn't look great. I know they came back offensively and got it done, but he didn't do a ton. I really don't know. And look, I don't think Brock Bowers is winning the Heisman.
No. He'll win the Mackey.
Oh, yeah, I think so. He may win a couple of other just general offensive player of the year awards, stuff like that. But I just don't have a Heisman favorite. And it is the midway point, and we normally have someone. Now, that guy has not always gone on to win the Heisman, right? Last year at this time, it was Hendon Hooker's award to lose, no doubt about it. There's no one like that this year. There are guys in the discussion. I think we probably take a big step, in along with the lines of we're in these college football eliminator games, right? Dylan Gabriel took a big step. I think obviously the winner of Oregon, Washington probably may jump to the front, whether it's Bo Nix or Michael Penix. One of those guys probably jumps to the front of the pack. But there's just no one has stepped out. The numbers are all good, but they're not so incredible that you can't deny it. I'm just waiting to see some of these guys separate. And so far, we really don't have that yet.
Yeah, we still got half a season to go. We're through 6 weeks of college football, which is just crazy to think about. We got 7 left. And then all of a sudden we're going to be in conference championships and really looking at a college football playoff. And it's just, we have a long way to go. And I think you nailed it though. It's the Heisman Trophy to me is a discussion not really worth having until November, because you need to see a body of work, and it's fun to talk about. Like like we're talking about the college football playoff and everything. You don't win it in September or October, but you could certainly lose it. And I think that there are a couple of people, there are more people who have lost their opportunity at the Heisman Trophy, like a Brock Bowers who didn't start off, like a Marvin Harrison Jr., like a Kyle McCord or somebody like that. But then there's other people who could play themselves into it, like somebody we're not talking about right now, JJ McCarthy, a guy who hasn't exactly
I've been talking about him a little bit, but
but he's not a guy who's necessarily, they haven't had a prime game.
Yeah.
They haven't had a game that
Agreed.
They've really been tested. I know they just played Minnesota, and I'm sure we're going to talk about Michigan here in just a minute. Like you look at a Penn State, maybe they've got somebody on there, and it's who steps up in the biggest moments. Like RG3 a few years ago, he didn't win the award until what he did against Oklahoma. Like it's one of those things.
Yeah, but he didn't come
was one of those.
He didn't
guys.
come out of nowhere either. I mean, he
doesn't come out of nowhere, of course.
More
But it's
touchdowns and incompletions and all that stuff. It's.
But
I agree with you. That's the highlight game. You got to have a Heisman moment. No one's been given a real chance.
I haven't seen one yet.
Yeah,
I haven't seen one yet, and I think that there is a chance that, like, what if you see Carson Beck emerge and he just does more of what he did last week, where he throws for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns and continues doing this. There's a lot of football left to be played, is what I'm saying, and these are the games that really decide the crux of your season in November and October. But I'm really excited. And we have tons of great football to discuss. And we're going to be doing it every single Monday right here on College Football Overtime. So set your alarm. Just mark a little calendar invite. Set a little reminder in your phone. Say, go to YouTube, type in College Football Overtime, and then listen to us babble on with each other and have a good time. Because what's more fun than babbling about college football, Abe? It's the very best. But I do want to finish one last thing before we get out of here. I do want to talk about who is in your college football playoff right now. I know we've alluded to it a little bit. Abe, I'll let you go first.
This is very difficult for me at this stage. And again, I don't necessarily rank teams the way everyone else does. I look at the resume, who you've played, who you've beaten, but also how you've looked in those games. I think we probably both have the same top two teams, but maybe in different order. I still have Michigan as the number one overall seed. Georgia really tightened that get for me because I know a lot of people already had Georgia. I had Georgia maybe out at fifth.
You
or
had them at like 6 or 7
ago.
last week. Yeah,
that's completely changed. They have really tightened that gap based on what I saw against Kentucky, but I still have Michigan as so far the best all-around team that I've seen this year. I have Georgia number 2 right after that. That's how impressive and significant, not just the win, but how they looked from multiple aspects, from the offense getting going to the defense blowing up, all that stuff. So Georgia 2, and now's where it gets really, really tricky. I think I'm going to go Oklahoma 3. Based on the heels of that win for them at the Cotton Bowl. So I'm going to go Oklahoma 3.
Sounds like somebody disagrees.
Yeah, she does. I've got Florida State 4. That's less how impressive they've looked and more just based on the resume. Ohio State 5 because of the resume. And then Oregon, I've got at 6 as one of the 2 out. Again, for them, it's not the resume as much as it is how they looked. And so the obvious ones to me are Michigan, Georgia. Those have looked like the 2 best teams now that Georgia finally showed up. After that, you grade them however you want. I'll give Oklahoma the 3 and Florida State the 4 with Ohio State and Oregon all outside looking in. Washington, Penn State hovering as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to be very consistent with these just in general. We've got 8 teams who are really jockeying for these 6 spots of consideration, I guess, and then eventually the 4 who will be representing college football at the end of the season. Now, my number 1 team is Georgia. I think that they've been the best team in college football, and they showed it on Saturday. You hold a guy like Ray Davis to 50 yards rushing, something like that, just right on the heels of his 200-plus yards against Florida, which is by all means a very good rush defense in its own right. But Georgia finally looked like Georgia for the first time this season, and I think that bit of a scare that they had against Auburn was just the catalyst that they needed, and I think Carson Beck kind of found a new gear in that fourth quarter of that football game, and I think that could help propel them into the rest of the season. My number 2 team, there she is. My number 2 team is going to be Michigan. I think that they have consistently been the most consistent team on both offense and defense this season. They just showed against Minnesota why they are largely respected as they are. I mean, you lose your head coach for the first 3 games of the season, and they don't even miss a beat. Michigan's my number 2 team in the country, and that's pretty close. And then it's Florida State. I think that I still think they have the 2 best wins of anybody in the country. They just rolled Virginia Tech on Saturday. It wasn't even close, that football game. They looked like a team that looks like a well-oiled machine and well on their way to representing the ACC, at least in the title game, if not the college football playoff once the season gets going. And then this 4th spot is very difficult for me. I think I'm gonna roll with Ohio State just because of the way that they won against Notre Dame on the road, difficult environment. And no, this is not the same 2-loss Notre Dame team that we saw against Louisville. This is a team that was fresh off of playing some of its best football and in a big spot in a home game, and probably one of the biggest home games that they'd had in South Bend in some time. And they won the football game in a game that they didn't look super great. And I still haven't seen the best Ohio State. I don't think we've seen that team yet. And this is a group that I think on paper should be a lot better offensively than they have been. I think they can still find that gear. I'm just going to be worried if they can't find it before the Penn States come in, before the Michigan comes in. And if they look like they did against Maryland in that first half, they're not going to win either of those football games, and we're not even going to be in this discussion at that point. But after that, then I'm going to say the winner of Washington, Oregon. I don't know who it's going to be yet. So it's kind of like originally I had both of them in my fourth spot just because they're going to decide who's who next week.
I'll tell you right now,
but
the winner of that game will immediately jump to number 3 for me.
They'll probably jump to that for me as well. And I think it's going to be Oregon, but we're going to continue that discussion. I'm going to flip flop on that probably.
I was going to say, I have no idea.
I have no idea, but I'm going to be picking it on Saturday, so I might as well get something figured out. I might roll with Oregon. I'm not sure yet. I gotta do some digging there. But I'd say that the winner of that game is likely to jump up into that 3 spot, and then it's Penn State and Oklahoma rounding out the back end of that. And I already cheated. I said, who's your top 6? And I give you 8 because
I did too. There's 8 teams in discussion. And that was one thing I actually wanted to mention when you asked me about the takeaways. It sounds like you're on board with this one aspect as well. USC is out of this discussion right now.
I don't have
until they prove otherwise. Yeah. Until they prove, they're like the LSU of the West, where it's great that you have that offense, but I just find it very difficult to believe that they're going to beat the Washingtons or the Oregons based on what they have on that side of the ball. So look, we've got the same 8 teams that are in this discussion, and both of us, despite them being undefeated, despite them have the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, I think both of us have USC until they prove otherwise, not in that chatter.
They're behind Oklahoma for me. They're behind both of their Pac-12 compatriots. I mean, they're behind.
Give it a week. Give it one more.
I think they're behind Texas. They're behind Texas too.
Well,
for me,
sure.
I mean, look, I have not seen. USC has played one, I would say, pretty good opponent, and that was Colorado, a team that Oregon took to the woodshed and beat quite handily. I talked about it with our 3 winners in an upset special.
Yeah.
I almost picked Arizona to win that football game outright, and I didn't because they didn't have their starting quarterback.
I was worried I screwed you on that, but luckily they still won, so whatever.
They did, and but this is a team that doesn't have its. They don't have its starting quarterback, and it doesn't have its starting running back, and you still leave them alive in this football game up until the final moments.
Forget alive. If they go for 2, they probably win that game.
That's it. And I would say Alabama is probably up there above him. I would say North Carolina could be up there above him.
I would say give it a week. North Carolina will jump them in my opinion.
I think that if North Carolina goes on plays Miami at home and they look as dominant as they did last Saturday, they're going to jump into the top 10. Because they are a really good team, and they are that much better now that Tez Walker has been added to this front. And look, I am so excited for what North Carolina can do. There are a lot of teams that still control their destiny. There are teams that are kicking the crap out of each other. I mean, hell, we have one SEC team that's undefeated now. Now, it's a team that I don't think is going to be tested all that much throughout the rest of the season. They got some good team games coming up. Ole Miss and Tennessee and Florida and every other game, those do matter a great deal, plus the SEC championship. But there's a lot of good football teams right now, and I think that this field is quite crowded. Because if you want to talk about people who are still alive, I'd say the top 15 teams in the country are still alive, theoretically. But got a long way to go.
Ole Miss is 13, so maybe not.
Maybe not that one. But you know what? The Ole Miss is still 4-1.
I'm kidding. I know.
They're still 4-1. They looked bad against Alabama, but I don't know if they're actually going to have an opportunity there. But you could say that at least.
Look, if they beat Georgia, you never know. If they beat Georgia, then they're back
all of a sudden they become a very interesting team. But Abe Gordon, I think that was a very great week of college football, and I am so excited for next week because we have multiple very interesting matchups. I think Notre Dame, I think, is also next week.
Notre Dame USC is next week. Yeah. Notre Dame Open is a
fascinating contest for
2.5 point favorites. Yeah.
4th straight top 25 matchup for Notre Dame. I just wonder if they still have any gas left in that tank, but we'll see on Saturday. You have North Carolina and Miami, like we mentioned. That is going to be a massive game for the ACC pecking order. Then for the national narrative of what the Pac-12 is going to be this year, A lot of that's going to be figured out on Saturday as Oregon and Washington take each other on, and probably the biggest football game that we've seen this year. I don't think many people expected that to be the case, but I really think that these are the two of the best teams in the country, and they're going to be squaring off on Saturday. This can be our college football game of the week. So you got to jump in with us on Saturday. If you can't join us in your car, do it on the Audacy app. Just download it right there on your phone. We'll do it in 8 o'clock till noon. Abe Gordon, Garrett Champman, and John Fricky taking you up, giving you all the college football news that you need. And then tune in here every single Monday morning as we take care of you and help you recap all of the news and all of the college football that you love so much. Thank you so much for listening. I am very excited for another awesome week of college football coming up next week. For Abe Gordon, I'm Garrett Champman. We are College Football Overtime. I will see you next week when we have a ton more college football to discuss. Thanks.